Before we begin, here's how to earn continuing professional education credit for attending this session. Gain valuable insights by attending the podcast, then complete the assessment test to download your certificate. To do this, follow these simple steps. Click on the link in your description to access the session. Create a free account and attend the podcast. After the podcast, take the assessment test and download your certificate. It's easy, and it's free. We highly recommend checking out our subscription. Let's get started.
And you earlier in the podcast you did mention about not to give it the data, like the actual data, because I think there are some ethical concerns there. But there is also the ethics for the AI, these AI tools and these companies that they make. Don't they have like some disclosures or something in place through which they kind of like already let you know that this data is safe, don't worry about it, something like that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things out there. Each tool is different. So if it's an internal tool to your company and IT signed off and said, hey, your data is not going external, go ahead and use it. Give it your data. If it's a public tool, unless you've talked to your IT, I recommend don't give it your data at all. Some will say, hey, you could tell it not to use the data, but that doesn't mean you still didn't give your data to something public. You're trusting them. So always, if it's not an internal tool that's been blessed by your security or IT or your company, ask security, IT, whoever it is, before giving it any of your data. Because the last thing you want to happen is you give it some sensitive data that gets shared in an answer later, and it just happens to be your competitor who reads the answer, right? Not a good situation. Just like you wouldn't throw out on the web your financials for next quarter before they come out, unless you want to get fired. The risk is low. But there's still a real risk there. So anything that's sensitive, anything that's proprietary, if you're not positive that the tool is not training or using that data, talk to your IT department and make sure that you can give it before giving it. But yeah, it's always easier when you can give it your data to help work with. You just got to manage those security concerns.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to your favorite podcast we're trying to figure out. I'm your host, Saul, and I'm thrilled you're here as we dive into the exciting discussion on how artificial intelligence is transforming the world of financial planning and analysis, or FP&A as we all know it. Our goal today is to uncover practical insights and strategies to navigate this evolving landscape. Joining me is Paul Barnhurst, also known as the FP&A Guy, with over 12 years of experience in finance and FP&A. Paul, it's fantastic to have you with us today.
And thank you. I'm really excited to be here. Look forward to chatting with you today, Saul.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's start by looking at the evolution of FP&A. For those who are newer to the field, could you walk us through what FP&A has traditionally looked like and some of the changes you've seen over the past decade?
Yeah. So FP&A, as people know, financial planning and analysis. The way I like to describe what FP&A is, we'll start there, is accounting is backward looking. FP&A is forward looking. So where accounting ends in many ways is where FP&A starts going forward. Another way to think of it is the job of FP&A is to help ensure the business best spends or best allocates its next dollar to maximize its return. And so that's what FP&A does. Now, as far as how it's changed, I would say, a number of things have happened. First, many years ago, 20, 10 years ago, it started more as like FP&R and R. And what the R stood for is reporting. A lot of time was spent putting big, huge packages together. In a lot of places, FP&A is still not the term that's used. Often, it's just someone who works in controllership or accounting that now all of a sudden they start having to build the budget and they figure it out as they go. What's this budgeting? Depending on what area of the region, size of the company. FP&A in general today is becoming much more well-known. Couple examples of that. One is CFOs, a much higher percentage of CFOs than ever before coming out of FP&A. Many experts are predicting that in the future, it will be the #1 place you see CFOs come from is FP&A. The reason for that and the change that's happened is FP&A has become much more of almost like an internal consultant or a strategic advisor. Goes far beyond the numbers. They have to know the business well, commercials, how to influence, tell the story. It just happens to be numbers are the language of business, but numbers are really one part of FP&A. It's much bigger than that, and getting into helping ensure that your strategic, your operational, your financial plan are working together.
All right, that's interesting. Well, I'm always curious to know, how did you first become interested in this field of FP&A? How did you get introduced to this?
Well, so I was working for American Express. I was doing a little bit of forecasting, a few different things, supporting a supply chain team, our supply team for sales, for like relationships with airlines, hotels on the travel side at American Express. An opportunity to get promoted came up. I wanted to be promoted. It was in an FP&A. I knew the hiring manager, and that's how I got into it. So it wasn't deliberate in that, oh, I want to go into FP&A. I would say almost nobody out of college, very, very few people think I want to go into FP&A. Most people don't even know it exists. There's corporate finance, there's investment finance, and odds are you're going to do one of the two. But the details beyond that, a lot of people don't know.
Yeah, and I guess also for the fact that, the term itself, FP&A, of late, it's a term that everybody knows. When you say FP&A, everybody knows it stands for financial planning and analysis. But back then, like when you got out of college, there was really nobody was even talking about it. There wasn't even like a term like FP&A in the market. Like nobody even knew about it.
Yeah, there really wasn't. And even today, it's not like there's a program. When you go to college, you have some for investment banking or M&A or, some classes in VC. Very few universities even have an FP&A class, let alone some kind of specialization, to help you understand, hey, budgeting, forecasting, and analytics and storytelling, and those things that are core to FP&A. So that's why so few people out of college think, hey, I want to go into FP&A. Whereas almost everybody sees something on investment banking or maybe M&A or general corporate finance. And so that's what you know. Or as some people like to call it, instead of FP&A, they call it F Panda. Because if you spell it out, it's F and then the word panda. So I have a shirt that says F with a little panda. So I have people that don't know what FP&A, don't work in finance is. They'll be like, who's the F Panda guy? There you go.
Well, you definitely do not want your name to be the F Panda guy. So I guess you're good with the FP&A guy, Yeah, that would be funny. But, you talked about, FP&A being a forward-looking mechanism, whereas accounting is a backward-looking mechanism. It's kind of like accounting is more reactive, whereas FP&A is more proactive. But that would also mean that you would have to have exposure to a lot of data beforehand for that analysis to happen, for that forecasting to happen. But, what are some of the biggest challenges that FP&A professionals face today, particularly as expectations around data and forecasting accuracy, they continue to grow?
Yeah. So the first thing when you start with data, first is that historical data needs to be right. So an FP&A person's best friend is a good accountant. Because if the accounting is messy, good luck forecasting. The prime example I give, anyone who works fractional CFO, advisory services for small businesses, the first time they get in there and work with the company, first time they've had a fractional CFO, they usually spend months fixing the chart of accounts, understanding the actual accounting to be more on an accrual than a cash basis, so they can then forecast what the future looks like. So that's the first place, is you have to have good historical data. Beyond that, one of the biggest challenges FP&A in general is clean data. I've seen studies that say, anywhere from 45% to 70% of FP&A people's time is spent in non-value add activities, with 40 to 50% of that being data cleaning. It's one of the biggest challenges because you need HR data for headcount planning. You need your CRM data for sales planning. You need the ERP data for the historicals, and you usually have some operational systems because you need to know those operational drivers that impact the financials. In many ways, those are more important than financials, whether it be visits to the website, downloads of a course, whatever it might be, foot traffic at the Walmart, depending on what type of business you're supporting, there's all kinds of different metrics you have to understand. And rarely does a company have good data across the board. As I like to say, I saw a quote and I modify it a little bit, but I saw a quote that said, all data is wrong. Most data is useful. I like to say some data is useful, but that's another story. No data is clean. None of it's perfect.
Do you want to earn CPE credit? Take this course of MyCPE ONE to earn free credit. Click the link in the description to get started.
But the analysis part also requires you to have exposure to certain tools. And I think back in the day, I guess Excel was the only thing that was there. But the industry has evolved. Today, we have a lot many tools, and especially with the advent of AI, which we'll talk shortly.
Yep.
But before AI, what tools do you think were doing really well in the market, or which you really like?
Yeah. So the way I think of it is there's a technology stack, and for all companies, it starts with a spreadsheet. It's going to 99% of the time it's Excel or Google Sheets, right? They're similar. You could perform similar tasks with them. They both have their strengths and weaknesses. Then as you start to build, at some point, you're usually adding some kind of analytics tool, business intelligence, whether that's Power BI, Looker, Tableau, Domo, whatever, right? There's a long list of those. The other thing you add at some point, the business gets big enough. One, you start with the BI, usually adding some kind of data warehouse. That's more IT, but FP&A often needs to know about it, how to pull the data, or at least tell somebody where to pull the data depending on the company size. Sometimes you're pulling it yourself. Sometimes you're not. So we get into SQL and other things. And then I'd say the other big tool you often see in FP&A is a purpose-built planning platform. And what I say with that is that doesn't take away a spreadsheet. You're still going to need a spreadsheet for all kinds of ad hoc analysis, edge cases. But a purpose-built planning tool will often integrate with your ERP, your HR, your CRM, maybe your warehouse, help build a model, help you with reporting, with workflow, collaboration. Fill in those gaps where Excel is not on its own an enterprise tool. You have to add things either around Excel or with a whole new tool to help with the planning side. And that's the area that's exploded. There's been a lot of tools in that area in the last few years because, people see the frustrations with just a spreadsheet and say, I got to do something. There's a better way.
Yeah. The data's got to talk to us in a more easier way. So that's why it is.
Versus having to become a Power Query ninja. Excel. But you have to become anyway, but that's another thing.
Yeah, that's true. And then, of late, I guess the buzzword today is artificial intelligence and all the beautiful things that it can do, which can also be scary because you're relying too much on somebody doing all the grunt work that you had to actually do. But let's delve into the role of AI. It plays into FP&A today. So could you share some specific examples of how AI is being applied in budgeting, forecasting, and even financial modeling?
Yeah. So, AI has been used for a while. I think sometimes some people will conflate generative AI with AI in general. You have AI and machine learning. In forecasting, machine learning statistical algorithms have been used for a decade, and they're still the dominant method. I'd say very few companies are using a generative AI tool to do their forecast. Either they don't have it internally or it's not built into their system. But many companies are using AI and machine learning for the forecasting piece. We'll get to the rest in a minute. And some great examples are Profit, which was built by Facebook. It's an open source algorithm that uses time series statistical modeling that you can use to forecast. Microsoft has made their open source called Fin, and a lot of others. A lot of tools have built in various statistical models that they can use to help you do a quick forecast, a quick budget. Maybe you take last year and you do some statistical modeling, or in one example, there's one tool that takes wherever you're at during the year and then forecasts what it would take to meet the rest of the year plan, how much bigger it needs to be. And so if you've been missing all year, you can quickly realize, oh, wait, this isn't possible. Because it doesn't just take your balance of year forecast. It takes all your misses and tries to forecast where they think they'll happen. And often, if we overestimate, which is usually the case, then you start to realize, oh, that's not really possible. Those numbers are big. And so I think those are the big areas. There's a study that was done a couple of years ago by FP&A Trends, great research paper, where they found that companies who used cloud had better forecasts on average, were happier with their forecasts. Those that were using AI and ML, it went up like another 11 points. So the best were those that had a purpose-built tool and were using AI and ML to forecast. So that's the first area. I think that will continue. Now let's bring in generative AI. Generative AI is going to be huge. It's still getting there. I mean, the studies show the majority of people right now, the number one thing they're using it for is help them with creativity, brainstorming, emails, summarizing documents. A lot of people haven't been using it, some using it for coding, but in finance, I don't think most people have really figured out ways to use it outside of Excel formulas and some basic things. So where we're heading is we're now starting to see tools implement it. And where we're going is from, hey, I chat with something and ask it to pull up data, which you can do all over the place, right? Everybody has their LLM and you tell it what you want, to it being more proactive, built in the tools in such a way. You're doing your month-end variance and it's just going to automatically come up with all your variances. Then you're going to add the human content to that because it can give you the basics, but it's not going to know the nitty-gritty of what happened, the human element that impacted those numbers. And those type of things, anomaly detection, that's going to continue to improve. And it's going to become much more of a reactive and built into the workflow and processes versus just being something that sits on top of the data. The other area that's really exciting is it gets better and better at cleaning data, doing it for us versus us having to find all of it. Automatically grouping and bringing up, hey, you have Delta Airlines spelled 10 different ways. Delta Air, Delta Airlines Inc. with a period, on and on. It's going to say, we combined all these to this, and here's your master table. All those type of things that will save us hours. I think those are the things that are exciting that we'll see as generative AI improves. One that's exciting, and Claude just announced it last week. They released it, but it's very, very early. I believe it's only on the Mac, is they released a desktop AI tool. So you can download it on your desktop. You can tell it what it wants. It takes control of your computer and uses the cloud learning model, the LLM, to perform the action. Showed an example where someone asked it to create a 90s style website. It created it. Then it asked it to put, I think it was Visual Studio Console, and then create a server, load it to the server. And with it, at the end of the 3-minute video, they're showing you the website out on the web. And all they did was prompts. So that's the type. Now, very early, very buggy. By no means is it production ready, but that's where we're heading with AI.
Yeah. And you brought up some very interesting points. There are two things. One is there are misconceptions about AI in the FP&A field that are coming. And second is obviously the real world example, like you just talked about this, wherein this is being done, So, but if I were to ask you, what are some common misconceptions that you are hearing about AI in the FP&A field that you talk to a lot of people? So what are you encountering are the common misconceptions of using AI in the FP&A field?
Yeah, I've seen one where somebody was like, it's okay if you give it your data. Okay. If anyone has that, I had someone who had that misperception, that very rarely, but that's one I've seen. If anyone has that idea, if it's not private, if it's not your company's, don't ever give it your data. I think the second misconception is that, well, I can't use AI if I can't give it my data. Completely untrue. One, you can give it dummy data. You can ask it to write Python code and then run it on your machine where you don't have to give it any data. You can have it help you write the formula for the data you're analyzing, tell it what kind of graph based on the data. So you can use it without being able to give it your data. There's a lot of ways it can use. The other thing is I think is a misconception, not just FP&A, but I'd say across the board, is this idea that all you need is a bunch of canned prompts, prompt engineering. The reality is Gen AI is going to give you a different answer pretty much every time you ask it, even if it's the exact same question. So you need to learn how to ask it questions, frameworks to think through it, and realize it's conversational or generative AI because you're supposed to go back and forth. Rarely does it get everything right on the first try. Sometimes you might have to work 30 minutes. Sometimes you may have just to finish it on your own because it doesn't quite get there. You're like, all right, it got me 80% of the way there. It gets you 80% of the way there in 2 minutes and it used to take you 2 hours. You're still better off.
Yep, absolutely. Gen AI, I believe, is kind of like a child. You got to train it. You got to let it know what you're looking for. Through baby steps, it eventually gets to where you're looking at. But to have, I think, this is also a misconception that I think that, a lot of people believe that, we got to train it, we got to let it know. But then to assume that now that we've trained it enough, we could just give it one prompt and it would take all the historic things that we were taught and it would just like be perfect. I think that's a very big misconception. You gotta continuously keep on training that model because it's still it's in a very nascent stage and it's continuing to grow. But very interesting indeed, and you talked about this product which did everything. But in terms of integrations of AI with FP&A, would you be having any exposure to any real world example where AI and FP&A has led to
I've definitely seen, I saw a tool the other day where it will take all your variance commentary and write it for you. You can have it pre-populated. I've seen a number of tools that will help prepare your decks with AI, tell them what kind of graphs or the information. And all of them are, they're decent. They'll get you started. I've seen ones that have early warning. I saw one that's using AI to reforecast your headcount every day and tell you how different it is from what you forecasted. So think if you're a big company where, 50,000 employees, AI can be really tough, has a ton of different algorithms. It's looking at all the data from all your different systems, who you've hired, who you've fired, and saying, hey, based on everything we see in your hiring trends, you got a problem or you're way under or whatever it might be. Often it's the under. How many of us have ever seen a plan where we're going to hire 50 people in January? You have one hiring person. You've never hired more than 10 in a month. What makes you think you're going to hire? Well, because that's how many we need. Well, then you got a problem, right? And so it goes through and looks at a lot of those type of things using a ton of different custom algorithms and kind of almost like an early warning system tells you, look, you're under, you're over, here's the things we're seeing compared to what your team built for a forecast based on your actuals. So that's one real example, a tool that's out there called Proconto. There's several others I've seen. DataRels does some PowerPoint, not PowerPoint, but they have their own slides where they'll start to create presentations for you using AI. A number of them have built-in natural language where you can ask questions. Now, the challenge is there is a real challenge. LLMs are not good with math. That's why they have the code interpreter. LLMs are, looking at everything they've been trained on and trying to come up with the right answer. Don't ever ask an LLM to give you an amortization table because it will be wrong. You could ask it to code one based on your inputs, and the Python will then be right, or whatever the coding is. But don't ask an LLM to do numbers. So that's one of the challenges is they're having to review them very tightly. It's why it's slow. You can't have it hallucinate the numbers. And so you have to train it to just give responses on strictly the numbers and the data and find ways around, the math operations, whether that be, using some kind of code to generate it in the background or whatever. The other challenge is finance people by nature hate black boxes. We like to be able to tie out every little number. And to a certain extent, AI is a black box. It's getting better. It's doing things like citing. Okay, I can see the code, but I may not know coding. And so you're going to see just a lower adoption. And we've seen that so far due to the risk profile and the risk. For example, if marketing uses generative AI, let's say they send an email out to 100,000 people and they put something wrong in it. Probably not a big deal, right? Okay, maybe they put 30% discount instead of 25%. Let's say someone used AI and they messed up something in a quarterly report and it goes out publicly, right? Stock price could go down by billions of dollars. Somebody's probably out of a job. So there's a higher threshold, just like in other areas, whether that be military or whatever, there's that higher threshold. And I think that is why often you see one reason you see finance slow adoption. The other is, finance often holds the purse string to the investment, and we'd rather see revenue being generated. So we often invest in everything else first and ourselves last.
Yeah.
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE One Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now.
In fact, I think what you just said, you kind of like answered the question that I had in my mind. I think you read my mind. I was about to ask you that, does AI help to enhance the accuracy and efficiency of the financial modeling compared to the traditional methods? You kind of just answered that.
Well, and I'll add a little bit to that if I can, because I think it's worth it.
Please.
So I run a podcast called Financial Modeler's Corner, and I ask every single guest one question. Will AI eventually build the models for us? 70-80% say yes, but almost all of them it's yes with the caveat. Yeah, they may figure out how to do the technical, build the background, but you always need that human judgment, somebody to validate those assumptions, to make sure you're meeting the business need, right? You can technically train software as long as you can make it a process. We'll figure out how to do it over time. It's just a question of when, not if. But the more complex, the more judgment, the harder it's going to be, the higher the chance for error. And that's kind of the conclusion I get from most modelers. You get a few that say, nope, we won't get there. But the vast majority say, yeah, it's coming. Some will say, hey, it's already here, depending on how you want to define it.
Yeah. No, it's true. Well, these are, obviously the theoretical concepts, but now let's shift to the practical side. There are gazillion companies out there who are looking to integrate AI into the FP&A process. I think that comes from the fact that, I think it's Gen AI, but now we just cleared it out. Gen AI is different, but then actual AI is different. But then there are companies who are looking to integrate AI into their FP&A processes. So if there were companies looking for that, what do you think would be the first steps that you would recommend those companies to take?
Yeah, I think the first thing, if a company doesn't have it, is they need a policy. Because this is one of those things that's coming from the bottom up. Employees are going to, if it could save them a couple hours, they're going to find ways to use it. So get in front of that and make sure you have a clear policy and a roadmap. So I think that's the first thing with AI, regardless if it's generative, RPA, machine learning, whatever it may be, make sure you have a policy for what employees can and can't do. And if there's certain systems they have to use, document that out so it's clear to the employees. Next is most companies need a data strategy, because garbage in, garbage out. Everybody wants to use Gen AI, but as I said earlier, a lot of data isn't useful. If your data is not good, Gen AI isn't going to give you a great answer. It may help you fix some of that, but you really need to be thinking about your data strategy, your data governance, who owns your data definitions. So you need a strong data culture. And that starts with figuring out what your data should look like. I think once you have those two things in place, then you can really start implementing AI. And the question is then, what am I trying to accomplish by implementing it? What are the questions I want to answer? And then figuring out, what's the best way to do that? Sometimes that could be some machine learning stuff, implementing a planning tool that will automatically do some forecasting for you. Maybe it's implementing Gen AI and allow your people to use Copilot across the board and helping them with formulas, with summarizing documents, etc. Maybe it's some more RPA. And I think as a CFO in leadership, you need to keep your eyes on what's out there and how it's changing, so that when those time come to make changes to your tech stack or implement new things, you know what the latest is. You know what may work best for your company. I always like to say it starts with people, process, then technology. Technology is the enabler, not the solution. So I would tell anyone who wants to get started, don't expect it to be a magic bullet and solve your problems. If you don't have the right people, you don't have good processes, Gen AI isn't going to fix that for you. You need to do that work. You need to make sure you've trained your people correctly. You have them in the right seats. You need to make sure you have the right processes. And then technology will be that enabler to allow you to accomplish more. So that's the advice. It starts with the policy or process, your data, then figuring, answering what is it I want to do. really be thinking about those use cases, then figuring out, okay, what are the tools that help me do that? What's the cost behind that? And what's that roadmap look like? So,
Right.
you kind of have to crawl before you can run. You can't just tomorrow be like, I'm going to use Gen AI and everybody's doing it. Well, you
No,
could, but I wouldn't recommend it.
yeah, yeah, no, rightly said, rightly said. And you earlier in the podcast you did mention about, not to give it the data, like the actual data, because I think there are some ethical concerns there. But there is also the ethics for the AI, these AI tools and these companies that they make. Don't they have like some disclosures or something in place through which they kind of like already let you know that this data is safe, don't worry about it, something like that?
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of different things out there. Each tool is different. So if it's an internal tool to your company and IT signed off and said, hey, your data is not going external, go ahead and use it. Give it your data. If it's a public tool, unless you've talked to your IT, I recommend don't give it your data at all. Some will say, hey, you could tell it not to use the data, but that doesn't mean you still didn't give your data to something public. You're trusting them. So
Yeah.
always, if it's not an internal tool that's been blessed by your security or IT or your company, ask security, IT, whoever it is, before giving it any of your data. Because the last thing you want to happen is you give it some sensitive data that gets shared in an answer later, and it just happens to be your competitor who reads the answer, right? Not a good situation. Just like
Oh,
you wouldn't throw out on the web your financials for next quarter before they come out, unless you want to
yeah.
get fired. The risk is low,
Yeah.
but there's still a real risk there. So anything that's sensitive, anything that's proprietary, if you're not positive that the tool is not training or using that data, talk to your IT department and make sure that you can give it before giving it. But yeah, it's always easier when you can give it your data to help work with. You just got
Yeah.
to manage those security concerns.
No, yeah. I mean, like, that's very interesting. In fact, I have been talking to, other people as well. Like I talked to the other day about this other gentleman who was talking about using AI in auditing, and he happened to speak about the concept of data lakes. And
Mhm.
he was also talking about the risk profile of this data, because the data that you're exposing, it varies with the employees who are using.
Yep.
Like for those who are at the lower level, when we define that, what kind of data is more risk averse and which one is less, their understanding of which data is more risky is different from somebody at the senior management. Their understanding what is risky. I mean, what may not be risky for them may be risky for somebody at the bottom, or it could be that way. So do these companies, would these policies also require to have like a risk profile of the type of data that you're going to be using? Should
Yeah,
that
well,
also be?
I think they should. I know when I worked at American Express and the Navy, which are both, high risk of data breach, right? Very important data. One is people's credit card data and personal information, and the other is stuff of national security, often. Both
Correct.
very, very high security. And there we had, I mean, at American Express, we had an add-in where we had to classify the level of all our documents. Were they
Okay.
high, low, medium from a security? They also they would search the web and look for anything that looked like credit card data and basically say, look, if it wasn't in a secure system, just out on a server or something, they saw anything that looked like that, they would, look, you got 24 hours to get rid of this or we'll delete it, basically. You'd have to justify why it could remain. And so they're very, very high like that. So I think every company should have some kind of risk type thing, but generally most companies have security training, and there's different levels. There's the, hey, publicly available information. There's the sensitive information, and then there's kind of the high risk, financials that haven't been released yet, stuff that can move the stock price, versus, hey, I'm just working on some new marketing for a tool that everybody knows is coming. Hey, not as big a risk. And so,
Yeah.
yes, there generally is, different levels, whether it's 3 levels, 5 levels. I think each company should at least be thinking about that and have some general guidance around the different levels. But again, I mean, I'd say unless it's public information and your company has a specific policy, don't give it to, don't give it to any external tool.
Interesting. Do you see that because of this advent of AI and this happening? Do you see growth in the field of risk professionals as well? That I think their roles will increase more
Yeah,
manifold.
I definitely think so. There's the ethical and there's the risk. So there's the risk side, but I also think you'll see an increase in the ethical side. We've all had these debates, but examples is bias. And I'll give this one example. They asked AI to create, I think it was 500 images of what the founding fathers looked like for the US.
Okay.
In 20% of the images, there was women, minorities, blacks, Indians, anyone who knows US history knows that every single one of the founders that signed off was an Anglo-Saxon male,
Yeah.
right? And so it just shows the bias that is potentially there, because you got to remember, all these tools are being trained on data we've created. And as humans, we all have bias. And so you're going to start to see models that review the models for bias being created. We've already seen some of that, and saying, hey,
Okay.
there's a high risk, or doing scoring. I think we'll see more and more of those type of things to try to address that. One company, and they got fined, and rightfully so, they had an AI trained that anyone over 55 that was female and anyone over 60 that was male, it was rejecting them automatically in the AI screening for a job.
Yes, yes, I heard that news. I read that news and I was like, wow, that is scary.
Yeah.
I mean, what's AI to, like make a determination? I guess, and you rightly said, ethics is a big thing because AI is learning on its own, but at the end of the day, it's working on data that we have created and given it to. So there's going to be a bias to it.
Yeah.
But
And what's scary is have what's called inbreeding. AI is being trained on AI created data. So
correct.
what are the risks around that? Do we really understand? What does that mean in 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, 3 years? Is it going to create a lot of group think where there's
Oh,
not
yeah.
as much diversity of thought because everybody's going to a tool to get their answer, and it's going to be very similar for everybody? So there's a lot of fascinating repercussions far beyond FP&A, and I know that's not the focus today, that would just be interesting to watch develop, and how we try to protect against those risks while taking advantage of the incredible benefits that come with the tool.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, I mean, like, considering a person that who has always had his, you always had a finger at the pulse of the industry, the FP&A industry, what trends do you foresee in the use of AI within FP&A, especially with the technology advances?
Yeah, where I think we're heading, and I think it's really interesting, is I think over the next few years, we're going to see a shift in the skill set needed for AI. There's going to be
Okay.
a stronger need than ever before, and it has been growing substantially, but a stronger need for what I'll call soft skills, or human
Okay.
skills,
Okay.
data storytelling, influencing, leadership, all those things that allow you to be a better business partner, collaboration, relationship building. Then there's going to be almost a need for greater technical skills. And I'll
Okay.
explain what I mean. Today, often the technical skills, you're great at Excel, maybe, a little bit of SQL. As time goes on, more and more of the Excel is going to be able to be done by tools like Copilot. Hey, just write me this formula. You got to know
Yeah.
the basics, but you may not have to be as deep. But where people are going to start getting more and more benefit, and where we're going to see more, is you're starting to see the citizen data scientist. And
Okay.
what I mean by that is I can ask AI to tell me how to use profit. I can go into Excel, has Python now, and within a day, I could probably run 4 or 5 different statistical models for my revenue, where many
Right.
people would have had no idea before. And I can take those results and I can ask the AI to analyze it and say, hey, does this seem realistic compared to historical? And start to do a lot of things like that. But you want to know some basics of Python. Some people say, hey, you don't need to know any coding. You need to know enough to check that it's right. You need it, and the more you know it, the easier it is to use it. Not that you need to be an expert, but I see almost some more stronger programming, maybe SQL, Python, some of those things needed than before to unlock Gen AI to accomplish things that people would have never thought of before. And I think a lot of what we're seeing with Excel is preparing for that. Copilot, for me, I think one of the biggest benefits of Copilot is the Python side. Now that Python is in Excel, being able to ask Copilot to do stuff allows you to do a lot more statistical modeling, much easier without as much, detailed knowledge. So that's kind of where I see things changing in the future. And it's fascinating to see. And I've had a number of guests on my show say that. And you never thought, hey, it's going to require more technical and more human skills. Most people just think of the human side. But I think there
Yes.
is an area where it's going to require more technical skills.
Well, now that you mention it, even I didn't know that, Copilot allowed you to have Python in Excel. I didn't know it myself. But now that you mention it, it actually makes clear sense. You would need to have those technological acumens as well for you to know what's happening before you can actually go to the soft skill side of it and start explaining and talking about it. Very, very interesting. I mean, this has been great. It's been very insightful. You actually have so much of exposure to things. But what parting advice do you have for our FP&A professionals who are looking to stay relevant and add value in this AI-driven landscape?
I was going to say run, but that'd be bad advice. No. Seriously, so there's a couple things. So first, know your business. I hear it again and again. Learn the operations and the details of your business. The best FP&A professionals understand the business. So that's number one. Two, build relationships with your business partners. If you make their life easier, especially when it comes to FP&A, the budgeting, the finance, all those things, if you relieve pain points for them, you become invaluable and they want you in the room. Where you want to get to as an FP&A professional is they don't want to make any important decision that impacts the business, the financials without you. Because I know we need our finance person in the room. That's the goal of where you want to get to. And then the third thing I'll say, I could list a lot of others, but right now is start experimenting with Gen AI. If you're not using it, I think everybody's experimenting, but try to figure out some ways to be more productive, not just the parlor tricks, so to speak, that we've all seen, but some real, hey, go ahead and summarize the 10K and 10Q for my competitors. You work in the auto industry. Take Tesla's last 3 years and have it summarize it. Take Ford, take the others, using between that and Power Queries, pull out their financials automated from, PDFs or whatever, and put it together in 20% of the time instead of 80 for doing an external benchmarking of your competitors. Because AI can get you started on all that, and then you just have to review that and scan the documents versus reading and trying to pull it all out, which can take you hours. So go ahead and experiment in areas that you can really use it. Next time you're stuck on a formula, instead of going to Google, go to an LLM and ask it to help you with the formula. I had an indirect I was writing, and I don't use indirects very often. And it was a nasty one because I was doing multiple indirect references. And so I just told it what I wanted, what cells, and chunked it out in about 20 minutes. I had it perfectly written versus me spending 20 minutes going, where am I missing a comma? Or where did I not get a quote right? Because we've all done that. If you've done any coding where you're like, what am I missing? This thing is not running. It's great for spotting that because it looks at it from a machine perspective where we're looking at it with our eyes like, okay, what did I miss?
Yes. It's true. And I just wish that AI was there many years back when we had to do everything with our hands. We had to actually write all our accounts by hand. We had to balance our books by hand. And when you get that 50-cent shortfall, and we're trying to find out where that is, that was crazy. But yeah, I mean, like, I'm glad with the way that AI is there. But yes, like you rightly said, tread carefully, be very careful. So before I let you go, I would always want to let listeners know where they can learn more about your work and how can they connect with you.
Yeah, so couple ways. Anyone could email me if they want. It's P Barnhurst at the FP&A Guy or the F Panda Guy, if you want to call me that, .com. I have a website, thefpnaguy.com. I have 3 podcasts because I don't have enough in my free time. So I have one about FP&A, all about FP&A this weekly. One that's all about financial modeling, a little more technical. FP&A is a little more strategic. And then I have one with an AI expert who just wrote a book on mastery of AI for finance professionals. Glenn Hopper, we co-host a show called Future Finance. You can find me on all the podcast platforms. I'm on LinkedIn regularly, and you can always contact me. I do training, software selection services, and influence marketing.
All right. And, just to summarize it all, you talked about a lot of tools throughout the podcast. So if you could just summarize summarize all those for me? Like, are there any resources you'd recommend for those interested in deepening their understanding of AI and FP&A? What are those tools?
Yeah. So as far as resources, the first one I'll throw out, I think if you're in finance, Glenn Hopper's new book, Mastery in AI for Finance Professionals, I think is a great book. I can't remember the exact name of it, but if you do Glenn Hopper on Amazon, he just has 2 books. You'll find it if you just do Mastery of AI or in finance. I think that's a great resource. Beyond that, I think it's experimenting with the LLMs, whether that be ChatGPT, Claude AI, Copilot, Google Gemini, they're releasing a new version. Whatever it might be, start experimenting and see what you can do. Start learning about how you can use AI if you're not doing it now. So I think the book's a great one. And then, beyond that, there's tons of courses out there. Lots of people who offer them. I won't list all of them, but consider taking one. If you're struggling and you really want to take benefit of somebody who maybe has spent, a couple thousand hours already doing this, then take a course from them, because it's always great to learn from an expert versus, sometimes it's a lot quicker than struggling for hours on our own.
You've been somebody who, you do this 3 podcasts and you do so many things. Did that thought ever not cross your mind to probably, also create some course for other fellow professionals?
So I do have courses. I haven't done an AI course. I have a best practices FP&A course. We do teach a little bit of AI on that. I have an advanced FP&A course that launches next week. Currently working on a little bit of AI in that course. So I do some stuff, but I haven't created an AI dedicated course. I have a number of Excel courses. I have data storytelling, data visualization. I do corporate training. I've worked with a number of big companies, some global ones like Dollar General, Walmart, and others. So yeah, I do quite a bit of training. I have not done an AI dedicated course. I think there's a lot of them out there. I've at this point left the dedicated ones to others, but you never know. I might do one someday.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm sure, that's something that all of the listeners would be really excited to know. So, they all know where to get you. So, thank you. Thank you so much, Paul, for joining us and sharing your expertise. And thank you for all our listeners for tuning in. Remember to subscribe and stay tuned for our more episodes where we dive deep into the topic shaping the future of finance. Until we talk next, keep trying and be successful in everything that you do. Cheers.
Thank you.
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE One Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now.